hemorrhage is stop immediately, apply pressure bandage, give Diamox or mannitol to decrease the intraocular and intraorbital pressure. Okay, so that is about the first possible complication. The second possible complication, especially with retrobulbar anesthesia, is accidental damage to the optic nerve. Your needle can press on the optic nerve and it can cause accidental damage. Then third thing is it can occur even with peribulbar or with retrobulbar. The third thing is accidental puncture of the globe itself. So with your needle accidentally, while giving into the spaces, instead of the spaces, if you touch the globe, then your needle can cause a track. See, this is how it will look. This is the track of the needle, and then this is the streak of blood. So even in that case, you will the globe will become very soft. There will be intravitreal bleeding. So what you have to do, immediately stop the surgery, put pressure bandage, and postpone the surgery for a later date. Later, 2 or 3 days later, you can do a fundus examination. If at all you see a small puncture or a hole, you can just close that puncture by doing a barrage laser around it. Okay, so this is how you are going to manage a globe rupture or a globe perforation while giving a block. So while giving retrobulbar or peribulbar block, there are three possible complications which can occur. One is a retrobulbar hemorrhage. Second thing is accidental damage to the optic nerve. And third thing is your globe puncture or globe rupture. Okay, so one more very rare complication is called as the oculocardiac reflex. What is it? Oculocardiac reflex means because of pulling up of any kind of extraocular muscle, sometimes there can be sympathetic stimulation, parasympathetic stimulation, that is stimulation of vagus. So you will get a vasovagal shock. That means bradycardia or arrhythmias or cardiac arrest, and the patient can die on table. This is a very rare complication, and it is more common with general anesthesia. Why it is more common with general anesthesia is because whenever you give a local block, that is your peribulbar or retrobulbar or subtenons, whatever, this particular ganglion, that is your parasympathetic ganglion, that is the ciliary ganglion, which is behind the globe within the muscle cone, this will get paralyzed. Okay, ciliary ganglion will get anesthetized if you give your peribulbar or retrobulbar block, because the anesthetic agent will spread into all the spaces around the globe and it will anesthetize all the nerves. So it will also anesthetize the ciliary ganglion. That is the reason you don't get a oculocardiac reflex if you are doing in a local anesthesia, that is peribulbar or retrobulbar block. But it is common when you do a surgery under GA. So what are all the cases where you will do surgery under GA? It is in pediatric cases, especially pediatric squints. When you're trying to correct under GA, what happens? We are trying to pull the muscles to cut them, to recess, resect, all these things. So because of that, this complication can occur. So oculocardiac reflex is a very rare anesthetic complication, more common with general anesthesia. Okay, so this is about the complications regarding anesthesia. The first three are quite common. One is retrobulbar hemorrhage. Second thing is accidental damage to the optic nerve. Third thing is accidental perforation of the globe. So these three are common anesthetic complications which can occur, and all of them are more common with retrobulbar block. Hence, the preferred type of block is peribulbar block. Okay, so I think I am clear. We will now move on to the intraoperative complications. So in intraoperative complications, you have to first think about the sequence of the surgical steps. So if you think about the sequence of the surgical steps, then it will be easy to understand at each step what are all the complications that are possible. So first thing what we do is a peritomy and then start with the incision, right? So the incision, as you all know, in a small incision cataract surgery is taken 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters behind the limbus. Look at the cursor behind the limbus. Okay, so this is how you will start with your incision. You will take the incision 1 millimeter behind the limbus and then start making your tunnel. As you reach the cornea, you will go into the corneal stromal layers for 1 millimeter into the corneal stroma before entering the anterior chamber. Okay, so by mistake, sometimes if on entering the cornea, you have started the incision at the right place, that is 1 millimeter behind the limbus only, you have started making the tunnel within the scleral layers. But once you reach the cornea, instead of going into the corneal layers, if suppose your blade by mistake enters into the anterior chamber, then it is called as premature entry. That means without doing the tunnel in the cornea, if you enter into the anterior chamber immediately after reaching the cornea, that is called as premature entry. See, look at this. This is the crescent blade which is used for making the tunnel. You will start here, you go up to the limbus and then go further into the corneal stromal layers before entering the cornea. So, but that by mistake, if you are not doing that and if you are puncturing into the anterior chamber, that is called as premature entry. Okay, so that is one very common complication that can occur. What will happen? Anybody can tell me what will happen if you do premature entry? Anyone? What will happen if you do a premature entry without making a corneal tunnel? You have done only the scleral tunnel, and on entering the limbus, instead of doing the corneal tunnel, you have entered the anterior chamber. That's called as the premature entry. What will happen? Anybody? At this, answer these. These are all the common questions which. Pardon me, I could not hear you.
The structures in the angle of the anterior chamber may be damaged, ma'am.
No, structures in the angle of the anterior chamber will not get damaged because you are entering into the anterior chamber. You are not going into the angle. Angle will be even more peripheral. You are entering into the anterior chamber, right? So instead of doing the corneal tunnel, if you are going into the anterior chamber, your tunnel will not be good. That means your incision will not be self-sealing. There will be wound leak post-operatively. Okay? Only if there is a tunnel, there will be a valve-like action. Okay, so this is a 3-step incision. What we are doing in cataract is a 3-step incision. You start behind the limbus. So this point is the limbus. So you start behind the limbus. This is the first step. You are going into the partial depths, 1/3 of the sclera. Okay, so this is step 1, and this is step 2. On reaching the limbus, you are going further within the layers of the cornea. So this is step 2, and then you are dipping into the anterior chamber. This is step 3. So if you miss this tunnel and if you are just going like this and entering directly into the anterior chamber, this valve effect will not be there. That is the reason in post-operative period, you will land up in a wound leak and shallow anterior chamber. Okay, so that is the problem with premature entry. So the next complication which can occur while doing this incision itself is some surgeons are overcautious. Okay, because they don't want to do premature entry. So what they will do, they'll keep their crescent blade. Look at this. The crescent blade is kept more anteriorly, so that they do not enter the anterior chamber. So in that case, what will happen is they will damage the anterior wall of the tunnel. So this is the anterior wall of the tunnel, and then there will be a buttonholing. That means instead of going into the corneal layers, the blade will come out here only, come out of the sclera. So that is called as buttonholing. That means a small buttonhole like thing will be formed on the anterior wall of the anterior wall of the incision. Okay, so that is called as buttonholing. So these are the two complications which can occur while you are making an incision. One is premature entry, that means without entering into the cornea like a tunnel, you enter directly into the anterior chamber. That is called as premature entry, which will lead to post-operative wound leak. And the second thing is, which is not that dangerous, is your buttonholing of the anterior wall. Okay, so that was about the complications which you will come across while doing a sclerocorneal tunnel. The next thing is, what are the damage that can occur? One is damage to the cornea itself. That means while you're say entering the anterior chamber, or while doing the tunnel, if your blades are not sharp, then you're when you're trying to make entry into the anterior chamber with a blunt keratome, then you can there is a possibility that you can tear the Descemet's membrane instead of entering into the anterior chamber. So that is called as Descemet's membrane tear. Okay, whenever there is Descemet's membrane tear, what will happen? Along with the Descemet membrane, the endothelium also is torn off, because endothelium is posterior to the Descemet's membrane, isn't it? So where, in whichever place there is Descemet's membrane tear, that part of endothelium is gone. So that part of the endothelial pump is gone. So that part of the cornea becomes very, very hazy and opaque. So, sorry. Look at this picture here, the one on the left. This is the area of the Descemet membrane tear. So it's very important to recognize that you have done a Descemet membrane tear. If you recognize it, because it's very thin and it will look just like your anterior capsule. If the surgeon thinks that it is anterior capsule and goes on tearing it, then the entire Descemet membrane will be torn and the whole cornea will become opaque. Okay, so the moment you make a Descemet membrane tear, it's very important to recognize that there is a Descemet membrane tear. In that case, you can repair it at the end of the surgery. You can just deposit the Descemet membrane and fill the anterior chamber with an air bubble. So this will act like a tamponade, and within 24 hours, it will stick back. Okay, so that is how you repair a Descemet membrane tear. It's very important to recognize. First of all, how do we prevent it? By using sharp instruments. This possibility of a Descemet membrane tear occurs because of utilization of blunt keratomes. Okay, so that is about injury to cornea. Next thing is injury to iris. So look at this picture. So what you do, you try to do an anterior capsulotomy and then try to bring the nucleus into the anterior chamber in case of SICS, and then put a wire vectis behind the nucleus and pull it out, isn't it? That's how you are going to bring the cataractous nucleus outside through your incision. So while putting this wire vectis here behind the nucleus, if accidentally you tuck it at this point and tuck the iris also and pull it with force, then what happens? The iris can get torn at its root. Where is the root of the iris? Anybody? Where is the root of the iris? Where is the root of the iris? That means where does iris take its origin from? This is anatomy question. Everybody should be able to answer this. Where does the iris take its origin from? From the ciliary body, isn't it? So see this. See this picture. So this is the ciliary body, which is like a isosceles triangle. So from the middle of the ciliary body, the iris is taking its origin. So this is called as the root of the iris. Suppose at this level, at the root of the iris gets torn off, then it is called as iridodialysis. Look at this picture. This is the picture in a live patient. The iris is torn off from the root. Then what happens? There is major arterial arcade there, isn't it? So there will be profuse bleeding and hyphema. Okay. And what else happens? Your pupil will become D-shaped because all these radial muscles will be like this and they will be attached to the ciliary body. That's why you are getting a round shaped pupil. The moment that pull is gone because of tearing, what happens? That side pupil will become flatter, isn't it? The round shape is lost. So you get a D-shaped pupil. So how do we recognize that there is an iridodialysis while doing the surgery? One is there will be bleeding into the anterior chamber causing a hyphema. Second thing is the pupil will change its shape to D-shaped pupil. Okay. So the commonest site of iridodialysis is 6 o'clock position because most of the times it occurs when you engage the nucleus and try to pull the nucleus out of the anterior chamber. By mistake, along with the nucleus, if you engage the iris also and try to pull it with force, the iris gets torn. So that is the reason why you get somebody has kept your this one. Please, everybody, mute your systems. Please mute yourself, everybody. Mute yourself, please. Okay. Thank you. Now, how do we repair? If there is a very small dialysis, you can just leave it. But if there is a large dialysis, what is the problem if there is a large dialysis and you leave it like that? What will happen? Anybody? Just use. These are all the questions what I'm posing. Posing to you are all the common questions which will be asked to you in Viva. Okay, so please think and answer. What will happen if there is a large iridodialysis and you leave it like that without repairing? Small ones you can leave, nothing will happen. But if it is a large one, what is going to happen? What is the complaint the patient will have? If you have a big iridodialysis, just look at the figure, na? It's so easy. You can make. What is problem with this figure? What is happening? There are two pupils, isn't it? So light will go from this and also from this. So the patient will have uniocular diplopia. Okay. So that is the reason if there is a large iridodialysis, you have to suture and repair. Okay. Otherwise, if it is a very small one, you can just leave it like that. If it is a large one, you have to repair. Okay. So that is about the complications or to the cornea and to the iris. In the cornea, there can be Descemet's tear if you are using a blunt keratome. Second thing is when you are delivering the nucleus, if you accidentally engage the iris, then there can be iridodialysis. Then next complication we will see is all the complications related to your anterior capsulotomy or anterior capsulorhexis. Okay, so we can do two things while doing a cataract surgery. We can either do an anterior capsulotomy in the form of can opener. That means where you will put small punctures on the periphery of the anterior capsule, and then finally join all these punctures and tear the anterior capsule. That is called as anterior capsulotomy or can opener technique. But the more refined and more advanced technique is capsulorhexis, where you will make a neat, circular, round, smooth edged tear in the anterior capsule. So, the ideal size of your anterior capsulorhexis is around 6 millimeters. Why? Because only if you do a 6 millimeter or 6.5 millimeter rexis, there will be a nice bag consisting of a rim of anterior capsule and the entire posterior capsule. And your IOL, which you are going to place, will fit in it snugly. Okay. But if there is a very large rexis, what will happen? If there is a small rexis, what will happen? We'll start with the small rexis. When the rexis is very small, say only 5 millimeters or 4.5 millimeters, then to bring out a big nucleus through the small rexis, you have to use lot of force. And manipulating through the phaco, if you're doing a phaco emulsification, manipulating through that small rexis with your phaco instrument also is going to be difficult. So the pressure inside the bag will become more, and there is chance of posterior capsular rupture. Okay, so that is the problem with the small rexis. What happens if you do a big rexis, very large rexis? If the rexis is very large, then the IOL may not sit in the bag. It can wobble. That is the problem. Third thing is eccentric capsulorhexis. That means your IOL is not centered. It will be decentered. Eccentric means your capsulorhexis is not in the center. It will be decentered. Then your IOL also is going to be decentered. Okay, and most common complication and not a very good complication of anterior capsule is extending or escaping of rexis. That means while you are doing a rexis, accidentally it will run to the periphery. If it runs to the periphery, then what will happen? That tear will extend into the posterior capsule, and it will lead to a posterior capsular tear, which is very, very bad. Okay, so these are all the complications, intraoperative complications related to anterior capsulotomy or anterior capsulorhexis. Next, after you do a good capsulorhexis, the next step we have to do is tackle the nucleus and remove the nucleus. After that, you do a nice, thorough lens matter aspiration. So, while doing this nucleus delivery, if in case of whether it is SICS or phaco, the first thing we do is a hydrodissection. That means we put little fluid between the capsule and the nucleus, and try to and the lens as such, and try to separate the lens from the capsule. So over enthusiastically, if you put a big jet of fluid, that means if you are injecting more than 1 or 2 cc's of hydrodissection, then the pressure inside the bag will increase, and your posterior capsule, which is the thinnest basement membrane in the body, will give way. So you will get a puncture in the posterior capsule. So posterior capsule rupture or rent or puncture is a very bad intraoperative complication. Why? Because if there is a large rent, then you will not be able to place PCIOL. The whole purpose of your cataract surgery itself is not served if you are not able to place a posterior capsular, posterior chamber IOL. Okay, so that PC rupture is a very, very it's quite common, but a very bad intraoperative complication. So look at this picture. This is the posterior capsule, and here is a large rent in the posterior capsule. Okay, so this PC rent can occur at the stage of hydrodissection, or like how I explained just now, or it can occur when you are doing a cortical matter aspiration using your Simcoe cannula. So while you are pulling the cortical matter, accidentally if you pull any capsular tag, then you will be causing a rent in the posterior capsule. A third possibility is a direct injury with any of your instrument. This is a phaco probe. So direct injury to the posterior capsule with your phaco probe. So instead of sucking the cortical matter, if you suck the entire capsule itself into the phaco, that is one possibility. Or using your dialer or your cystitome needle, any sharp instrument, if you are handling it with um, uh, not very delicately, then you might cause a posterior capsular damage or rent. Okay, so this is one very it's quite common, and but it is the whole purpose of cataract surgery is lost if you create a big PC rent, because you will not be able to place PCIOL then. Okay, so that is about PC rent. Now, what will happen if there is a PC rent? Anybody? One answer I have already told, that you will not be able to place a PCIOL if there is a large rent. The other thing, intraoperatively itself, what will happen? The moment there is a PC rent, what will happen? Anybody? What is there behind the? Very good. The next complication is your vitreous loss. Every PC rent may not be accompanied by vitreous loss. If you recognize that there is a rent the moment it has occurred, there is a possibility to prevent vitreous loss. You can immediately stop all your parameters, bring it to this one, put air bubble, tamponade it, and then go for a vitrectomy if at all there is vitreous is bulging. So you can manage, but most of the times if there is a PC rent, it is accompanied by vitreous loss. Okay, so what will happen if there is a vitreous loss? The vitreous in the an anterior chamber is a very bad thing to occur, because the vitreous causes damage to the endothelium. It will lead to post-operative bullous keratopathy. One. Second thing is vitreous in the anterior chamber and towards the section, because vitreous is like a gel. Okay, so it will just pull everything along with it, and it will stick to the section or your incision site. So then it will form like a wick. Okay, so that is called as vitreous wick. So that wick will always be a nidus for your bacterial infection to occur. So there is always a chance of endophthalmitis in the postoperative period if you have left vitreous in the anterior chamber and in the section. Okay, so these are the complications. Which and another one I forgot to mention here is zonular dehiscence. What is zonular dehiscence? Suppose you are trying to bring the nucleus into the anterior chamber, or you're trying to phaco it with lot of meddling, then the zonules can, which are very delicate, they can get damaged. So that is called as zonular dehiscence. So if the zonular dehiscence is there in very small area, you still can place the IOL. But if the zonular dehiscence occurs in more than one-fourth of the quadrant, then you may not be able to place the PC IOL, because the moment you place, the whole capsule will dip and the whole bag can fall into the vitreous. Okay, so these are all the intraoperative complications. Apart from all these complications, which are quite common and can occur during your surgery if you are not very careful, there is one more complication which is the most dreaded intraoperative complication for a surgeon, and that is expulsive hemorrhage. What is expulsive hemorrhage? Whenever you are operating on a patient who is hypertensive or whose intraocular pressure is very high, what happens is the moment you give an incision, the all the contents of the globe will come out slowly. Can you see in this picture? The IOL that has been placed is come out into the anterior chamber. See, this is the haptic of the this cursor. What I am pointing is the haptic. This is the optic. Partly it is inside, but it is being pushed. And if you carefully look behind the IOL, you can see a red glow. That means your choroid is bulging. It is bulging out. The retina gets detached. The choroid gets detached, and everything just comes out of the incision. This is the most dreadful intraoperative complication because you cannot salvage the vision at all. You just can't do anything because everything will keep coming out. So this complication has to be prevented. How it can be prevented? By not operating on a patient whose intraocular pressure is high, or by not operating on a patient whose blood pressure is high. So your preoperative workup should be perfect. You should see that the patient's blood pressure is under control and his IOP is also not more. And while giving a block, give a good massage, make the eyeball soft, and then begin your surgery. Okay, so that's how you can prevent expulsive hemorrhage. So, with this, the intraoperative complications are finished. Now we go to the post-operative complications. The post-operative complications are the commonest questions that are going to be asked to you in the exams. See, the entire post-operative complications are divided into two. One is early and the other one is late. Early means the complications which occur in the first 2 or 3 days, that means 48 to 72 hours after surgery, whatever complication is going to occur is the early post-operative complications. And late post-operative complications are ones which will occur after 1 month or 2 months. Okay, so in cataract surgery, the most crucial period is the first 2 or 3 days. So, whatever complications have to occur will occur most of the time in those 2 3 periods. So, if you take good care in those 2 3 days of post op surgery, most of the times there will not be any problem for the next 1.5 months. 1.5 months is the time, or 2 months is the time to heal. Okay, for the entire wound healing it takes 2 months. So after 2 months, whatever complications you are going to get, that is termed as late complications. Okay, so we will see in detail about the early complications and late post-op complications. The first, see, in this exam, it was asked what are the early post-operative complications. We have seen many students write post-operative astigmatism as an early complication. You all should understand that astigmatism is a result of scarring, and scarring occurs when there is total wound healing. So total wound healing will occur only after 1.5 to 2 months. So how can astigmatism occur in the very next day, or the first 2 or 3 days? It's not possible, isn't it? So you should have a clear concept when you try to answer anything that is asked to you. So early complications means the complications which occur in the first 2 days. So and also everybody has started with hyphema. Most of the people have started the answer with hyphema. Why? Because in Kurana, the first thing they have given is hyphema. But you all should understand that hyphema is a very rare complication because our surgery is mostly avascular surgery, isn't it? Your conjunctiva is avascular, your cornea is avascular. The only structure which is vascular and you are dealing with it or meddling with it is your iris. And damaging iris is a very rare thing. Only if you have done an iridodialysis, you will end up in a post-operative hyphema, isn't it? But everybody has written hyphema as the first early post-operative complication. So you think clearly and go for those which are likely and most likely to occur and most common to occur. The most common post-operative complication to occur on the first day is your striate keratopathy. Look at this picture here. Striate keratopathy means on the corneal descemet's membrane there will be folds and there will be edema in the cornea. Why is this occurring? Because of the touch of your nucleus or touch of any of your surgical instruments to the corneal endothelium while you are doing a surgery. This is very common because you are putting so many instruments inside, you are trying to bring the nucleus into the anterior chamber, trying to deliver it outside. So there is a chance that your nucleus is going to rub on the corneal endothelium or any of your instrument is going to touch. So to prevent this complication, what can you do? Anybody? To prevent striate keratopathy, what can you do? You all know this. What can you do? Anyone? You can attempt to answer
Viscoelastic
even if it is very good. Very good. We have to use a very good is viscoelastic substance because the viscoelastic substance will give you space, will create space in the anterior chamber. It will deepen the anterior chamber. One. Second thing is it will coat the corneal endothelium and it will protect it from getting damaged by your instrument touch or touch of the nucleus. Okay, very good. So the commonest complication is your striate keratopathy and your post-operative anterior uveitis is also very, very, very common. Why? Because we are meddling the iris. We are doing so many things in the anterior chamber. So some amount of irritation and inflammation of iris is inevitable. So early post-operative anterior uveitis is inevitable. It will definitely be there. And that is the reason in the post-operative period, we are treating with a steroid and antibiotic, isn't it? Antibiotic to prevent infection and steroid to treat the iritis which we have created because of our instruments and meddling of iris tissue. Okay, so please, whenever they ask early post-operative complications, your first answers should be post-operative anterior uveitis and striate keratopathy. Okay, next, another early post-operative complication is your shallow anterior chamber. Why does shallow anterior chamber occur? It means that there is some aqueous which is leaking from the anterior chamber. That's why on the first post-operative day, the anterior chamber is not deep, but it is shallow. So this has happened, as I told you, if you have done a premature entry or if your valve is not functioning well, then there will be wound leak. Okay? How will you test for a wound leak? There is a test called Siedel's test by which you put a drop of fluorescein. This is a fluorescein strip. You put a fluorescein strip here and look for aqueous leaking out. The fluorescein makes it gives the color greenish, fluorescent greenish color. So you can see fluorescent green color aqueous leaking out. That's how you will make out that there is a wound leak and you will take the patient up for repair. Okay. So next common cause for a shallow anterior chamber is serocoroidal detachment. It is a rare complication and it is a self-limiting problem. Because of wound leak, it can occur, or it can occur idiopathically also. So there will be detachment of choroid because of fluid accumulation behind the choroid, and the choroid starts bulging. So that is called as serocoroidal detachment or serocoroidal effusion. So because of that, the choroid pushes everything from behind, and the anterior chamber will become very shallow. Okay, so you can look in this picture. This was pre-operatively. See the anterior chamber depth, it is so deep. And see in the post-operative period, so look at the iris, how it is bulged. And this is the depth of the anterior chamber. It is decreased so much. Okay. So that is one reason. And the third reason is pupillary block. In case of aphakia, your vitreous can block. Sometimes if you have placed AC IVOL, then the IVOL can block. If you have not placed in the bag, then the IVOL itself can block. Or if there is severe postoperative reaction and Seineke formation, then because of Seineke formation, there can be pupillary block. Okay, so these are all the reasons for shallow anterior chamber in the early postoperative period. Most common being a wound leak. Then another common complication is secondary glaucoma. Why do you get secondary glaucoma? The commonest cause of secondary glaucoma is retained viscoelastic substance. We all know that we put lot of viscoelastic substance during each and every step of cataract surgery in order to protect the endothelium and to give us some space, isn't it? But at the end of the surgery, it is mandatory to clean all the viscoelastic substance. If suppose you have left viscoelastic substance, then this viscoelastic can go and clog the trabecular meshwork, and the sieves become clogged and the pressure rises. Another reason is retained lens matter. If you have not cleared the lens cortical matter clearly, all those cortical matter pieces itself can go and block the trabecular meshwork and lead to secondary glaucoma, or pupillary block can lead to secondary glaucoma. So these are all the causes for secondary glaucoma, and this is also a very common complication. And rarely, as I told you, hyphema. Why hyphema? If you have damaged the iris in the form of causing an iridodialysis, or you have damaged the sphincters of the pupil, while if suppose the pupil was small and you had to meddle or cut the pupil to deliver the nucleus outside, then there is a chance for bleeding. Okay, because there are two arterial circles. One is major circle and minor circle. Minor circle will be around the pupil. Major circle will be around the at the root of the iris. So if you have caused a damage at the root of the iris by causing a dialysis, there is a chance that there will be lot of hyphema. Or if you have caused some kind of damage in the minor arterial circle also, then there can be hyphema. Okay, so these are the early postoperative complications. And last two of them are iris prolapse. Look at this picture here, post-operative period. When you are trying to examine the patient, the pupil is not round, and through the incision, a part of the iris has come out. This is called as iris prolapse. When does iris prolapse occur? Anybody? When does iris prolapse occur? Why iris should come out? If the incision you have made is not proper, that means if there is no valve or no tunnel, then it is not self-sealing, isn't it? And then iris prolapse will. So if you have realized that you have done a premature entry while doing your cataract surgery, so at the end of the surgery, you have to place sutures. Otherwise, through that, there will be wound leak, or there can be iris prolapse if at all the patient suddenly coughs or strains while doing stool or stoops, whatever he does, wherein the intraocular pressure rises. In such cases, if your tunnel is not good and you have not placed any suture, though it is not good, then the iris can come out of the incision. So that is called as iris prolapse. And iris prolapse is used to be a very common complication of the conventional ECCI world. Because in conventional ECCI world, what they used to do is, it was not a tunnel. They used to place sutures. Suppose the sutures were loose, they had not placed the sutures properly. Then through the place where the sutures were loose, the iris used to come out. That's called as iris prolapse. Okay. So in case of phaco and SICS also, there can be iris prolapse if your tunnel is not good. So that is very, very important. And finally, the most dreaded post-operative complication for any ophthalmic surgeon, as you all know, is bacterial endophthalmitis. The very next day, most of the times it is at the end of 24 hours, the patient will complain of severe pain and no vision. The cornea will be hazy, and when you look into the anterior chamber, there will be hyphema. Okay, hypopyon. And when you try to look into the fundus, you cannot see anything because the entire vitreous cavity will be inflamed and filled with vitreous cells. So this is called as endophthalmitis. Endophthalmitis means inflammation of all the intraocular structures. So there will be reaction in the anterior chamber, posterior chamber, and vitreous chamber also in case of endophthalmitis. Okay. And treatment of endophthalmitis and all, you all know, you have written reasonably well. But most importantly, many people I have seen writing topical antibiotics and topical steroids. You should all know that your topical antibiotics and topical steroids, they work very well for infections and inflammations as long as they are in the anterior chamber and posterior chamber. That means when there is an infection or inflammation in the vitreous cavity, your eye drops are not going to reach. Okay. So what you have to do is, you have to give your antibiotics and steroids into the vitreous itself in case of bacterial endophthalmitis. So you have to give steroids and antibiotics. Basically antibiotics. We also give steroids because there is severe inflammation also. So under very good cover of antibiotics, we give little intravitreal steroids too. Okay. So these are given intravitreally. That's very important. Treatment of bacterial endophthalmitis is intravitreal antibiotics. And in very severe cases, what you have to do, you have to take out the entire infected vitreous. That is called as vitrectomy. Okay, the entire because the whole vitreous would have become like a ball of pus. So if that pus is there, it is going to eat away the layers also. That is your retina, choroid, everything will be gone. When the pus goes to everything, then the only thing that is left to you will be evisceration. And a patient who has come to you for cataract surgery and you land up in taking out his eyeball, then they'll sue you. You must have seen in the newspapers all the post-operative cases landing up in next class, landing up in infections. Okay, so that's about your late post-op, early post-op complications. I think the time is up. We will tell about the late post-operative complications tomorrow's class or some other class. So this was about early post-operative complications. Okay. So we'll end the class now. Before ending, I want to make an announcement.